So in this special service today, we're singing hymns, praising God and celebrating creation. We're familiar with the words in the Bible telling us to look after the beautiful world God made. And we're also aware of the many ways which we as humans are failing in this. Plastics accumulating, sewage outfalling into the sea, there's deforestation. We're destroying habitats, causing extinctions and reducing biodiversity. This affects plants and animals, but also people. As Christians and as a church, we have responsibilities to do something about this, and we need to act now. This service is part of the biblical and spiritual context in which we consider why we should be doing something and think about how we do it. The two big environmental crises which we face are biodiversity loss and climate change. Now, many of you know already that I'm studying a degree in climate change, so I'm going to focus on that today. But the biodiversity loss is crucial also, and they are linked. I recently did an evening talk here with the questions and answers to share what I'm learning. It was based on questions that people have asked me since I started my course. So you needn't feel left out if you missed it, because I'm actually going to do it again at Primrose Hill Community Centre on the 18th of October. So if you're interested, please do come. I find that knowing more about climate change and what might actually be helpful has really helped me with my anxiety about it, and so I would recommend becoming more informed. I'm not going to go over what I said now, but the science is clear. Human activity has already resulted in average warming of about 1.2 degrees C since 1850, and we all know that is already causing wide-ranging climatic effects. Examples include the heat wave and drought and wildfires, all seen in the UK this summer. Storms and flooding are much more serious and much more frequent, like the appalling disaster we're seeing in Pakistan at the moment, where a third of the country is underwater and a seventh of the population have already been directly affected by the floods. These events and others have huge human cost, threatening lives, homes, jobs, health, culture, and social stability. And this effect is not equal on all. On every scale, it is the poor and the powerless who suffer most. Poor continents suffer more than rich ones. Poor countries suffer more than rich. Poorer cities suffer more. Even on a minute scale, poor streets and poor households suffer more than rich. And it is also the less powerful and the voiceless who suffer. Women more than men, disabled and sick more than the well, uneducated more than the educated, displaced people more than those at home. So why is it that it affects these people more? Firstly, it's about exposure. So those who are poor and voiceless are much more likely to live where they're at risk. In Nigeria, Mumbai and Dhaka, the slums are in places which are much more prone to flooding than the richer areas which the colonial powers chose for their city. In Camden, those who are in badly insulated top-floor flats suffer more than those who've got multiple floors and can choose a cooler part of the house. Secondly, there's resources which enable choices. So those that have the option to escape or buy things that might help them defend themselves from floods or heat waves, air conditioning, a break with your relatives, all of those things can make you more comfortable or often safer. And the third big factor is recovery. So those who can afford to rebuild after a climatic disaster or to replace what they've lost are in a much better position. And there are many who can't afford anything, not even insurance. If your slum was washed away last week in Pakistan, it's really likely that you have nothing at all. The passage we heard from Isaiah is just one of many in the Bible calling us to care for the poor and to act justly. In response to that call, we must act to do what we can to slow climate change. Some things will be relatively easy, but other actions do involve sacrifice. So climate change is caused by the release of greenhouse gases, I'm sure you all know that the main one is carbon dioxide, which mainly comes from burning fossil fuels like coal, gas and oil. Each tonne of carbon dioxide remains in the atmosphere for 600 to 1,000 years and will continue warming all through that time. The other main gas causing warming is methane, which also comes from fossil fuels, also aeroplanes and agriculture. That lasts much shorter time, only about 30 years, but causes much more warming, up around 30 times more warming than carbon dioxide. The sooner we can reduce emissions from these gases, then the overall amount of climate change will be less, but also the world will warm more slowly. And if it warms more slowly, that gives us and all living creatures more time to adapt. Any reduction is good, and the sooner the better. I know a lot of people are afraid of tipping points and that we're too late. There are climatic tipping points, but there's no one big one, and no one knows exactly when they'll come. It's definitely not too late to take action. But as the parable of the fig tree says, we have a chance now, but we need to do something which will bear fruit. People often ask me what they personally can do which will have the most effect. There are many things, and I'm really happy to discuss them. But for now, reducing flying, it's the biggest emitter by far. Cutting down on eating meat, especially red meat and dairy products, makes a big difference. Turning down the temperature on your thermostat, even by 1 degree, and that will also save you money given the fuel prices as they are now. And buying less stuff. Everything we buy requires manufacturing, which uses is a big producer of carbon dioxide, and also each thing we buy is a signal that that thing is wanted and causes more manufacturing. Many of the changes we need can only come through changes in policy, locally, nationally or internationally. Our individual and group actions are a signal that we care, but I also believe in campaigning for change. Politicians need to understand that this is important, and policy changes can occur. The UK, although failing in many areas, was the first country in the world to legislate regarding reaching net zero. And climate policy was one of the big reasons why the change in government occurred in the last election in Australia. As for what we can do as a church, the Church of England has ambitions to be net zero by 2030. And things are happening in St Mary's. So after a long and difficult process, we now have permission to put solar panels on the church roof. Several of us have been discussing different ways to keep the church warm that might be less emitting. And I know many other people have ideas as well. So please do talk to me and email me now as Creation Care Champion. My contact details are in the front of the service sheet. And I'm going to be collating people's ideas. And please join the meeting that we're going to have after the service today to talk about the next steps. I believe we should also be responding to the changes that are occurring. So as climate change occurs, it will affect people, and that we need to support others, our community, and people further away. Again, things are happening in relation to this. The church this summer was a designated cool place and had signs outside and glasses of water for people to come during the heat. And I know Marjorie and I have been talking about it being a warm place when it's cold in the winter. Regardless of our own personal wealth, we're all fortunate to live in a country which has a moderate climate, is wealthy, has decent infrastructure, education and information, and we will suffer less than most. Many people won't be able to stay in the places where they live now as the climate warms and their places become uninhabitable. And I pray that we will be welcoming. Our reading in Timothy reminds us that we brought nothing into the world, we can take nothing with it, and there are many benefits from generosity and sharing. In Wales, there's now a minister who has responsibility for future generations. She can review any policy and has already caused decisions to be changed. I hope we all might consider future generations when making decisions, individually and collectively. whether it is a building project, what to have for dinner, or when to buy a new phone. As a first step in this process, we're going to use the framework of Eco-Church, which is a non-denominational framework, setting out ways of measuring and improving the environmental performance of churches. We will look at worship, the church building, all the activities that take place here, our engagement with others, and our own lifestyles. There is much to do, and it will be challenging, but if we work together with imagination and collaboration, it will bring us together, and as it says in Timothy, create a good foundation for the future. Ideally, this is something which will involve us all. So the meeting that we'll have after the service will take place in the church. Please do come and join in once you've collected your coffee. And I pray that with God's help, we can make a difference.